Hi and welcome to the seminar. My name is Tony Gray and I run a small publishing consultancy based just north of Oxford. I'm also a past student, DPhil student at Wolfson, and I'm privileged to have had an association with OCLU for a few years now. Many thanks to the Centre for Life Writing for the invitation to take part in this seminar. What I want to do in the seminar is share with you some of my reflections on 2 decades of working with ordinary people writing their life stories. What I do for a job is to help people recall, write up and print their memoirs for family and friends. So the reflections in the seminar come from that 20 years of work. The case studies are real clients that I've worked with. And whilst this is not a formal research project, it includes my reflections on what I've been doing for the past 20 years and some aspirations for things that I'd like to research and look into. So thanks for the invitation, thanks for watching. I hope it's of interest and I look forward to comments, questions and reflections. So I want to talk a little bit about how I got into this role of being a personal historian and helping people write their life stories. My journey as a personal historian. My background is in research. I actually did my DPhil at Wolfson in the subject of philosophical theology, which you think might not set you up for a life writing biographies. But certainly the skills that it equipped me with in terms of research, writing, analysis and inquiry set me up in a way which was incredibly useful and beneficial as time went on. After my research, I worked for a while in some mainstream publishing houses. I'd always had a fascination and interest in books, and it was either going to be the academy or publishing, and I chose the publishing route. But after 4 or 5 years working in publishing, I was slightly disillusioned with the corporate nature of the publishing world. And as by nature I was a nosy person and feel much more comfortable talking about other people's lives than my own, my fascination with people's lives seemed to become stronger and stronger. I remember very clearly, and I still have the same experience, travelling into London on the train. I live in Bicester, so the train takes me into Marylebone. And as you get closer and closer to London, you go past all these gardens, these backs of houses, and there are rows and rows of Victorian Edwardian terraces. And you get a teeny snapshot into these people's lives. You see the trampolines in the garden, you see the mess and the chaos or the tidy, orderly nature of the houses. At wintertime you see lights and shadows, and I'm just amazed that there are all these people, all these lives, all these hopes and aspirations. And every time I go past one I think, I wonder what they're doing, I wonder who they are, I wonder what they're enjoying or loving or hoping for or crying about. So a fascination with people's lives, and mixed in with that is a fascination with social history. So that all took me to a stage where with a friend we set up a company helping people record their biographies, and I now run my own small company doing the same. So that's my journey as a personal historian. There's obviously a lot more to it. But through 20 years of working in personal history, I've had the privilege of working with a huge variety of different types of people. The sort of people that I'm talking about who are ordinary. There's a chimney sweep. This is not actually a photograph of him because I couldn't find the right photograph, but a man who had simply made his living cleaning the chimneys of the rich and wealthy in London. I've worked with a pilot. Well, actually, this is my dear dad, who trained in the Air Force for his national service and spent the rest of his career working in chemicals wishing that he'd stayed on and become a pilot. He always talked about them as the best years of his life. I seem to have worked with a fairly large number of vicars, and they all have their own particular unique take on things. This is a fairly recent client, and Ian had a special ministry to people working in agriculture, so working with farmers and those in the countryside, and work with a factory worker. Now, this is not the actual client that I want to talk about, but I'll talk about Joan a little bit later, a woman who kept her family going by working in all manners of ways post-war. I worked with a homemaker, and there is my dear mum, looking after my two older brothers. Mum didn't have a professional career as such, but she spent her life supporting her husband and supporting her family as they travelled around the world and made their own way. I've worked with a number of soldiers. Here's one in particular. He had an interesting story. He worked with the film and publicity unit of the army during the Second World War and went on for a career in television. I've worked with policemen. This chap grew up in Kenya and worked in police forces across Africa and parts of Europe before working as a policeman in the UK. And I've worked with a mayor. This woman, Iris, part of her story was a time serving as mayor, and in fact she did many other different things in her life working in public service. So I'm very fortunate to have worked with a whole variety of people, and that's just a small snapshot of some of them. Now, people come to write their life story for a whole lot of different reasons. There are different motivations. And I just want to look at a few of the negative ones that I've encountered before looking at something a little bit more positive. So, of course, there are those people who come with a strong sense of importance, their own self-worth. They think they are something special, which is ironic when I'm talking about people I encounter who think they're not special, and I have to convince them that they have something to say. But sadly, there are those people who think that they are important in their own right and they have a story that's worth telling. And often they're the people who think that their story will then be published and will sell in the hundreds and thousands, and that they will make a fortune through it. And I have to disabuse them of that notion and convince them that there may be other, better reasons for writing. People often have a sense that they, even though they're not celebrities themselves, they have touched celebrity, they've tasted it, they've seen it in some way, and therefore their story is worth telling as well. The whole notion of writing biographies, of course, is riddled in a bad way by this notion of celebrity. And I do sadly end up with some clients' books that are full of photographs of them meeting royals or meeting famous film stars or meeting television personalities, as if that's the only interesting thing they feel they have to say or want to pass on to family and friends. There are too the people who have a score to settle. They feel they want to set the record straight. I worked with one woman who sadly wanted to devote a whole chapter to why she thought her son had failed her, why he had let her down. And in the end, I had to say to her that we were only going to proceed with her book if she removed that chapter or found a way to write about it in a different manner. And there are, of course, always different ways that you can do things and that you can make points without being so obvious and hurtful. For clients who always want to, for clients who often want to say something nasty about somebody else, I say the best way to do it is just to not mention them at all. And then we're not straying into dangerous territory and we're avoiding having to make that a focus for the book. And there are plenty of people who come and want to write a book and they have an axe to grind, whether that's about certain issues in their family or friends, or it's their pet theory about the world, about religion or conspiracy theories. And And sometimes they push that and it comes through strongly, but I have to advise them that there are other better reasons for writing. Now, of course, we all have various psychological needs, and we are all very complicated people. Every biography, however it's done, has a whole mix of motivations in it. These are some of the negative, and we would be lying to ourselves if we didn't have some of these or others as well. But I try to push forward in writing somebody's life story with two aims, two positive aims. And these are aims that I try and encourage the client, the author, to think about. Firstly, that what we're doing is a gift for family and friends. This is, if you like, a present to the world. And even if that world is a very small number, it's just your children or your nieces and your nephews or your friends, it is a present of yourself and everything that you want to leave about yourself. And if you think a present is a good thing, it's something positive that you want to pass on to the family, then so this biography should be a good thing. And in that sense, the second aim is that it should be a celebration of your life. Now, a gift and a celebration doesn't mean that everything's perfect. It doesn't mean that you avoid the negative and the difficult, and there aren't things that you struggle with in a biography. But it's looking back and celebrating that your life has included all of these things, and you're still at a place where you want to write about it and share it. This lady, by the way, celebrating her 90th birthday, is the lady we saw earlier who was mayor, Iris. And you can see on the cake there the little marzipan icing figure of a mayor. And I was privileged to be at her 90th birthday party. Iris made it to 93. And she saw this whole enterprise as very much a celebration that she wanted to share with her family. So those are two aims that I try and encourage my clients, my authors, to have. And they are very much to the forefront of everything that I do. Running in the background are two principles that I think are important and that guide my approach and inspire what I do in helping ordinary people record their stories. The first is that I am recording social history. And this may be something that I would share with a client if they're interested, but it's very much my belief that social history in itself is an important discipline. It has significance and worth in its own right. And in working with clients and helping them write their biographies, even if we only ever print one copy, it is a record of their particular slice of social history. It is something that is worth doing in its own right because of that. And the second principle, and is linked to that, but is something that I will want to explore more at another time, is the link between biography and human rights. Now, the link may not be explicit. You won't look up in the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, which you see a picture there of Eleanor Roosevelt with. You won't see an item there that everybody has a right to write their biography. Of course not. But if you think about the values and principles that documents like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights are espousing, is very much the right and the worth of the individual. No one individual on this planet is worth any less than another, whether they be born here or in a different country, whether they be born now or in 10 years' time, whether they be born rich or poor, whether they be born in any race, of any sex or gender, in any class, etc., etc., they have value in and of themselves. And if you extend those underlying basic principles of human rights to what we do in biography, then everybody's biography too has value. It also has value. It has a value that is not any less or greater than the biographies that we may see along the shelves in the bookshops. And so that's a second principle that guides what I do with clients and that helps me encourage them to think that they have something worthwhile to say. But before I do that, I just want to run through some questions that I ask clients or prospective clients who think that they don't have anything worthwhile to say. It's interesting if you do this exercise, getting people to think back through their life, then hopefully it starts triggering some ideas about what they have lived through and what they might want to share. And this, of course, is only a start. So, for example, have they worked for any interesting companies, for a firm that had a bad reputation, or that made a huge amounts of money or went into liquidation? Have you campaigned for a political party by going door to door, voted for a party that won at a landslide election, or were you one of the many who cried when Margaret Thatcher walked out of office? Did you buy the first ever single by the Beatles? Did you see Pavarotti at his sellout Wembley performance? Can you remember when the Star Wars film came out and fired the imagination of a generation? Think about your life. Were you impacted by the AIDS crisis in the 1980s? Did you know somebody devastated by the thalidomide tragedy? Or do you remember your parents telling you how good smoking was for you? Did you line the streets of London to watch a royal wedding? When Diana died, did you see the wall being broken down? Think again about your life. What about children and family? How have you shaped their lives? Did you encourage and help your daughter in her medical career? Did you help your son kick his cocaine habit? Did you care for an elderly mother as she battled with dementia? Did you support your sister through her miscarriage? Were you there when United won the Cup, or did you help as a steward at the 2012 Olympics? Did you win £1,000 on the Grand National, or did you run a marathon for charity and raise lots of money? These are just some of the trigger questions I ask and explore with clients, either when they think they have little value or nothing worth saying, or when they're struggling to remember the significant points of their life and their history. There are lots of different ways to go in, and this could be a different talk if I was exploring that. But these are points which make people realise they are part of a larger picture. It's not just their story, and their story is not just ordinary. So to turn back now to the issue of social history. Social history examines the lived history of the past. And in a sense, that's what all of us as biographers are doing in whatever medium or form we're working. But social history as a particular discipline, I feel brings something special to the role that I'm doing, working as a biographer, working with ordinary people. Social history touches on and focuses major issues of public debate. For example, debate about the British national character or the nature of family life. How is it possible to make assertions or even to make policy decisions on such issues without knowing what's really happening in the lives of ordinary people? Social history attempts to do this as it looks back to the past and helps inform that historical record and also helps inform debates today. Social history not only reflects public interest, but arguably it prefigures and helps create it. For example, during Margaret Thatcher's time in government, there was much talk and emphasis put on family values. But arguably those Victorian values were being rehabilitated by enthusiasts for 19th century thinking a decade or more before Thatcher came to power. And that's just one example. But social history will certainly reflect the interest of the public at large and create movements that then take the headlines in national politics and social policy. Social history mobilises popular enthusiasm, and that's never truer than now in a world of social media where the events and experiences of everyday lives are instantaneously available and can be seen in a much quicker and more present fashion than they ever have been. And social history, of course, gives those without a voice a voice. The ability to tell the story of everyone and anyone is important as we think about this role of being a biographer. Now, I have to put a caveat there, and of course I run a business and it's a professional service, and people have to have the ability to pay for that service. And so in some sense, I'm only giving a voice to those people that can pay for it. But I believe very strongly and committed to helping to find other ways that those people without a voice can express their views and their history and their story. And I know OCLU is committed to this as well. Social history is directed against the great man theories of history. And I think all of us involved in biography in some way would agree with that. These are the stories of not the leaders and shakers, they're not the prime ministers, these are the stories of everybody. And social history is directed against those great man theories of history. Social history evokes the human face of the past and its material culture. One of the great joys I have with clients is looking at that human face. And of course, the most obvious way to do this with clients is to go through photographs. And it's one of the highlights, and I absolutely love looking at particularly older photographs. So photographs, if they're around from the 1920s onwards, the formality and grandeur of some of the photographs is inspiring. But it's not just photographs, of course, the material culture in which we live our lives. So objects and things we own, possessions, furniture, houses. I often go for a walk through a house with a client, particularly if it's a house they've been in for a long time, or if not, we look at their furniture and things they've brought with them, because all these objects are part of that story and part of the social history. Ordinary people are the focus of social history, and in that sense, everybody is ordinary. That's what we're talking about, but it elevates that ordinariness to something that is important. And social history counts its practitioners in the thousands, probably the tens of thousands, rather than the hundreds. If you include those who fill the search rooms of the public record offices, the local history rooms of libraries, people documenting family roots, the volunteer guides at open-air museums, or the thousands of railway fanatics who spend their summer holidays acting as guards or station staff on narrow-gauge lines in the Pennines and North Wales. These are all contributing to the practice of social history. So I want now to look at 3 case studies of clients that I've worked with, just to illustrate some of what I've been talking about, the social history and the celebration of life. The first case study is of this chap, Hugh Moore. At the end of the Second World War, the social, logistical and financial problems facing Europe seemed insurmountable. Yet while the Western powers were struggling to work out the detail of what became the Marshall Plan, Hugh Moore was one of thousands volunteering to help with the relief work in Germany and elsewhere. His recollections provide eyewitness accounts of what the devastation was like. Hugh had kept detailed diaries during his time as a Quaker relief worker in Germany from 1946 until 1948. He visited Berlin in 1946, working and observing as a volunteer. So a couple of excerpts from his diaries and the biography that he then wrote up. Some of the team came round and we loaded a huge barrel of cod liver oil onto the truck. They took me to their DP camps. These were the displaced persons camps. Jack showed me round. The main one is a transit camp for refugees and DPs from the Russian zone and New Poland, in transit to the British zone. There are about 7,000 in a barracks, which normally houses 2,000 people, so the rooms are grossly overcrowded. I looked in many rooms where they have wooden double-decker bunks, less than 2 foot apart. And at another point, he then talks about his experiences of visiting Hitler's bunker. In the afternoon, took Fred, Errol, J&M again to visit the Chancellery, as there was a chance of getting down into Hitler's bunker. It is pretty bare now, with very little furniture left. It was a weird feeling walking about in the depths of this bunker into Eva Braun's and Hitler's bedrooms and study, and to see the whole place black from the flames and still with that damp, burnt smell about it. Took J&M on in the car to John's friend in the American sector for tea and afterwards some music. We had to leave early because we had decided to go to the opera. We heard a performance of Verdi's Othello. Desdemona's voice was good, but the Moor was very poor, so that while it was an interesting production, it was not the best singing. There's been quite an uproar in Berlin as a result of the verdict on the Nuremberg trial prisoners. At a demonstration, which I did not see, there was a protest and death demanded for the 3 who were set free. If they are not guilty, why should we be counted guilty? Seemed to be an opinion frequently expressed. When I met Hugh in 2001, it was clear to me how much his experiences half a century earlier had influenced this kind, gentle man's career as a teacher, headmaster and philanthropist. His commitment to story meant that Hugh had his diary typed up and printed, and it's now available to purchase. He sold several hundred, but Hugh never wanted to make money. Always an educator, his desire was for his children's children to see what he had witnessed in post-war Europe. And when we last spoke, before he sadly died a couple of years ago, he was horrified by current political events in Europe and couldn't help but refer me back to many entries in his book. So Hugh was there one example of how his experiences and the history that he had lived through informed the rest of his life and the rest of his biography and informed what he wanted to do with his life. My second case study is of a lady called Joan. And there's Joan on the cover of her very simple book, actually with her second husband. The 1960s and 70s saw the British steel industry at its best, with production at an all-time high. As politicians and business leaders began to gamble everything, Doris was on the shop floor working as a buffer. And here's a picture of a buffer. This is not Doris herself, but this just illustrates the point. Just one of hundreds on a large production line that kept the industry afloat. Divorced and with 3 small children, Doris's memories provide valuable insights into how that booming industry shaped the local community. Doris decided to write her life story as a small book and give it to her family, friends and former colleagues. With fascination and admiration, I learned that in an era during British society when divorce was frowned upon, Doris threw out her cheating and abusive husband. That's her first husband, not the one in the photograph here. She included her wedding photo in the book, but the erring groom was ripped out, the rip next to Doris signifying her strength of character and determination. She didn't say anything else about the first husband. The rip was enough. But without any state support, Doris raised finance for herself and her children by placing an advert in the classified section of the local newspaper, simply stating, "Something for the weekend, sir," and giving her address. Doris somehow managed to import French letters from the continent and sold them from her back door, boosting her income and providing a service to the local community when contraception was not readily available in chemists and shops. Again, a fascinating window into many aspects of British life. Things that Doris herself thought were not important and unremarkable, and yet which fascinate me and others. And my third case study is my dear mum, Elizabeth. Elizabeth, mum, sadly passed away a couple of years ago, but her story as well had so much to tell, not just me as her son, but those who were interested in the wider history. Married to an industrial chemist who was working for Shell Oil, Elizabeth was posted with her husband to Indonesia from 1960 to 1964, where she attempted to set up home, teach at a school and plan for a family. As tensions grew between Western industry and Indonesian powers, Elizabeth experienced the increasing pressure and anti-Western feeling. As a woman overseas, her life became harder and harder, whilst news from London told her about a swinging 60s revolution which was completely alien to her. Elizabeth wrote a weekly letter home to her mother every week for 4 years. Yes, they are full of the mundane, how to acquire furniture in the tropics, how she learnt how to pluck a chicken and cook using hot spices, and how the monkeys kept stealing her flowers. But they also gave remarkable insight into social mores of the day and how the rapidly changing world affected her. And I read just now a little portion from her memoir. We were quite isolated and didn't have phone calls. We only learnt of Kennedy's assassination from the Shell wireless operator, and generally communication was very slow. Steve, my brother, wrote to me about the Beatles, and I thought he was talking about some insect problem. A funny family joke, but a good indication of how isolated we were. When the Beatles' music finally got to Indonesia, it was banned as not good music. We could listen to the BBC World Service, but the reception was so bad that we could not hear it most of the time. Further upriver was an American Standvac refinery, so we got to meet some of the Americans. The men met for work and golf tournaments, and the women for bridge. We would spend the day up there and have lunch with them, where they had so much more than us. Beautiful accommodation with air conditioning. We lived in a bungalow in Plaju. On one side of us there was a couple from New Zealand, and on the other a young couple from the north of England who had 2 little boys. They were very friendly, and I remember once giving a Halloween party, which a lot of people attended. We were cooking as much as we could European style, although there was a lot of satay and fish. They didn't have cows, so there was no fresh milk or cream, which is one of the reasons why I've drunk my coffee and tea black for years. We ate mostly what we had ordered from the company deep freezer. John would get food out once per week, and we did a lot of entertaining, so it was often a surprise what meat would appear. Playing bridge was my lifesaver, because I enjoyed it and picked it up quite quickly. Not that I was a great mathematician, but it fascinated me. We also made soft toys and other toys to give us raffle prizes at dances that were organised. We would decorate the club for the event, and I also helped at the library to keep myself busy. And that was Mum's, or a slice of Mum's story. And again, when I talked to Mum, just before she started showing the signs of dementia, when I talked to her about recording her memoirs, she said, "Oh, nobody will be interested. Nothing special has happened to me." And yet, in my eyes as a son, and I think in eyes of other people, she has had a remarkable life and has much to tell us. So, in conclusion, I just want to summarise where I've gone and what I want to say. Many people, when I talk to them about writing their life story, about writing a biography, will say to me, "Well, I have nothing interesting to say." But during 20 years of working on personal histories and hundreds of clients, I've yet to find someone without a story. Everybody has a story, everybody's story has value, and everybody's story is worth hearing. Your story, your memories, are part of our story. That's what I say to them. As part of the human condition and as part of the human race, everybody's story has value and is of interest and is worth doing. There are so many stories, and this photograph hangs up in my study above where I work and inspires me every day. I'm very fortunate to have this family photograph, which is celebrating the 21st birthday in 1911 of the lady in the middle at the top. And she's part of a larger family group, which includes my grandmother. My grandmother is the 1-year-old baby girl, I think she's 2 years old actually, baby girl, on the left of the picture, who is being held by my great-grandmother there holding my grandmother, is the daughter of my great-great-grandfather, who is the patriarchal figure sat in the middle with a small goatee beard and a small girl on his lap. His wife, my great-great-grandmother, is sat to his left, or as we view it, on his right, with the hat. Every single person in that photograph has a story. And as a sort of busman's holiday, I've done research and writing on almost everybody in that photograph, all with deeply fascinating, sad, happy, joyous, frustrating stories to tell. But there are so many stories in that just one photograph, and there are so many other stories to tell. And that's what I say to people who think they are just ordinary and have nothing to say.